Oh my god, that was terrible. Where do I even begin? The story was ill-inspired, taking a ridiculous amount of tropes from other places and then not even implementing them in a new or interesting way. The characters were bland, and despite the fact that this is a 3D animated series, characters were as 2D as could freaking possibly be. And I think when I describe it as 3D animation, right, I think I'm being very loose with that, because the 3D aspect, well, you're not gonna really argue with that, but the animation, this is barely animated. Or if it is animated, it's just animated bad. Or maybe it's not even animated bad, it's just like the freaking compositing is terrible. I can't even finish my sentences because this show pisses me off so much. I had to drag myself through like the mid portion of the show. I didn't even finish it, I'm gonna be perfectly honest. And if some people come at me and then say, hey, you shouldn't be talking about this thing that you didn't finish watching, or making a video in which you talk about this thing that you didn't finish watching because that's unfair to the material, well then screw off, because I'm doing it anyway. I absolutely hated this. And if anything, if I can use this as kind of like a beacon or some kind of sign to people being like, please don't watch this show. Don't watch what is pretty much the worst CG animated series of this entire year, then I am going to do it. So let me tell you, flat out, do not watch X-Arm, because it is a terrible freaking anime. It came out at the start of this year, and if you haven't heard of it by now, good, because you shouldn't, and you should never hear about it again. And instead, we're going to talk about Arcane. Because by contrast, Arcane is quite literally probably the best 3D animated thing, even though it's not necessarily 3D animation, but different reasons and in better ways. From like the best from like the last very long time, at least year, though I know we're probably going to want to have discussions between whether or not it belongs in best anime of the year. But no, you can't do that because Arcane is not anime. It did not come from the Champagne region of France, and so it is not anime, it's just sparkling animation. And you can go have that argument, like everybody has been having that argument for years and decades, and will continue to have until the end of time, because no one will change their mind once they've got it set in stone in their brain of what constitutes as an anime. But as animation, I think it's probably the best of the year. There are arguments here as to style and tone, which is why, like, some of my front runners in the actual anime sphere, like Odd Taxi and Ranking of Kings and things like that, like, they still have very, very big prevalences, and I will stand them to hell and back. But we're not talking about a video about them. We're probably going to be talking about them when I do my end-of-year wrap-up, because, you know, people will yell at me if I talk about Arcane in that video. So, to kind of put that out of the way, and to make sure that I actually do have a video on what I think to be one of the best animated series from a long while, anime coming from Japan or no, then today we're just going to be talking about Arcane. But first, a quick word from our sponsor! Glass Reflection would like to thank the sponsor for this video today, being the good people over at Surfshark VPN. A VPN, for those of you who don't know, is a way to help protect your privacy and what you view online as you surf and watch anime or animated content and other videos on the web. Not only does it secure your data, encrypting it to stop people from eavesdropping on your connection, but it also allows you to mask your location. Doing so allows you to bypass the region locking of a variety of streaming services, as not all streaming services are equal in what regions they service. So having a VPN like Surfshark can help you access shows that you might not be able to otherwise. So when we're talking about something like Arcane that only exists on Netflix, you need to be able to actually go see the thing to understand half my points. So content blocked on services such as Netflix and YouTube can be accessible simply by connecting to the local server of the country you'd like to access. And of course, Surfshark is available on a variety of devices as well as your PC, so you can stream your animated content on the go if you so choose. There'll be a link and a promo code in the description where you can sign up for a percentage off, because we love you guys just that much. And best of all, if you try it out and find that it doesn't help, it's not doing what you expected, or it doesn't end up unblocking the content that you wanted to, Surfshark does offer a 30-day money-back guarantee. No questions asked. So thank you very much to Surfshark for sponsoring the video. Now, Arcane. The reason why I did that bit at the start, talking about X-Arm, which I really do mean you should never watch, it's not good, is because I feel like Arcane is the absolute opposite in quality in almost every single respect. So let's talk about the negative points that I made against X-Arm that someone could try and apply to Arcane, because I feel like that's very important. Is Arcane a 3D animated series? Yes and no, actually. So the way that I've been trying to sell this to a lot of people is that you can pause this show on any frame, and it will end up being the kind of frame that you would see just like put on fake faux parchment with like a character bio next to it, because the frame looks like it was painted specifically for that one frame. Now, we know that it wasn't necessarily done that way because it was animation. There were a multitude of frames, and depending on how it goes, it's probably a 30 FPS show, I'm going to imagine. So why is it both like 3D and 2D? And that's not just the animation style. It literally is. There's a lot of 2D stuff here. The actual characters are 3D. They are walking around in 3D space, but half of everything else on the screen at any given moment are 2D objects. Almost everything that you see in this show, barring the characters, is 2D painted. That's why it has that look to it. If anything, it's far more impressive that they were able to translate that style to the 3D models, because the 3D models, the characters get so much focus, and it's amazing. The stylistic choices here just, oh, it is so brilliant, and I love it. I love this style. I love it when they're not trying to be like either overly cartoony, or if they're trying to be overly realistic with 3D animation. 3D animation loves to try and be as realistic as possible, and honestly, I wish that they would just not do that, because they'll hit the uncanny valley and it won't look as good in like 5 or 6 years. Anybody remember when Spirits Within came out? Maybe you're too young for that. I'm really, really old. But when Spirits Within came out, not only did it tank its animation studio because no one gave a shit about it, but it looked really freaking good for the time. I can't say that it looks good now because it doesn't. We have seen so much better in the years since. It doesn't look good anymore on retrospect. But like something like Arcane with this stylistic aspect will probably still look great in a decade from now. Probably only topped by whatever the hell they come out with next. And that'll be a discussion we'll get to. I have point form notes. We're going to get there. So you have characters and you have this world that is brilliantly animated, that just pulls you in with just how it looks, how it's presented. The presentation of this show is brilliant. And then you get to the characters. And I have to admit, it's been a very long time since I've watched a show where I think there isn't a single character I disliked. Every character here, even from just freaking minor ones, feel like they have so much depth to them, right? The great thing about having this style of animation and having people that give a shit about what they're doing when it comes to the animation is that you can tell so much story about any individual character just through the animation and not dialogue at all. You can have your characters walk through a bar, which they do, and you can have the camera turn and pan around and do that thing of, oh, look how dark and how dark and scary all of these patrons are. They're people not to be messed with. Don't start a bar fight or anything like that. But like, just the amount of detail and the amount of story that you can show off, and that they actually do show off in those moments, is brilliant. I've said brilliant a lot. I'm probably gonna have to come up with a list of all of my positive affirmation words and just use all of them and keep going in a loop, because that's what's gonna happen in this video. Every character has motivations. Every character has things like goals that they want to do, and the story sets them all up in not necessarily predictable ways. And I think that is also, God, there are so many good things. I think that is also like really, really good. There are multiple times in this show where I feel like my inner analytical brain was working, trying to figure out, all right, where are they going to go with this, right? Something would happen that sets up what is going to occur. You know what? Screw it. I'm actually going to do spoilers because I want you to watch this show. So if you haven't, go do it anyway. So we're going to talk about some individual things. When Jinx picked up her flare gun and shot it into the air, there was a part of me that watched that and was like, oh, that's not going to work. Or Vi's going to see it and not be able to do damn shit about it. Why? Because Jinx needs to continue to go insane, and having Vi there would make it harder for her to actually go insane. This is what my mind was saying at the time that I was watching this. And then the Mad Lads in the story department was like, no, we're going to take this thing that in almost any other show, we're going to set it up. Oh, look how tragic this is, that the character saw it. They saw the thing that they should do, and then they didn't do the thing, or they were unable to do the thing. and we're just gonna have them do it. We're just gonna have Vi show up, and then you're gonna have this wonderful moment between her and Jinx/Powder, and it was great. The show is filled with those moments. Like, if I was to fault any predictability when it came to this show, it's just that if you have even a passing knowledge of League of Legends, especially like if you watched any of the League of Legends animated shorts and music videos that exist on YouTube and so forth, then you kind of knew where Powder was going. You knew roughly who Jinx was, because like I don't know many champions from League of Legends. I haven't played in literally a decade. I actually looked it up for this video. I am an extra month over a decade, because the last time I touched it was around November of 2011, and I know that because I was getting really into a new champion who just came out at that time. Oh, I'm gonna screw up her name. Riven? She was just coming out. Now she's been part of the game for the last decade. Cool, great. I haven't touched the game since she came out. But I have watched some of the animation things. And like when the KDA thing came out and everyone was like getting real hype over that, I never went back to League or anything, but I watched it and I enjoyed it. It was a great piece of animated music video stuff. But I also watched things like the Jinx music video back in... when did that come out? 2013? So I knew who Jinx was. I knew her style of character. I knew her influences. Because League, well, actually most MOBAs have been very influenced by other media throughout time. Like, you don't have a character in in Dota 2 called Lina without realizing who that's supposed to be. And hell, League itself has freaking Lux. And if you don't know what she's based off of, well... look it up. And I think maybe that's almost a good thing, that you have to look so much up. There is, I feel like one of the most common questions with Arcane is, hey, do I need to know anything about the game? No, you don't need to know anything. Like, sometimes things help. Like, I would definitely say that one of the reasons why a favorite character of mine from Arcane is a favorite character of mine is because while I haven't played the game in a decade, I absolutely spent a ridiculous amount of time doing solo mid with Caitlyn. I was absolute shit at it, and especially because like the game as it is now is probably very different from how the game was a full decade ago. But I do have memories of using her. I have memories of playing as Ashe and Lux and playing that game. There are reasons why I walked away from that game. Because it got to a not fun place for me, and I feel like that's perfectly valid. But I have those memories of those characters. I feel like Caitlyn was the only character that showed up in Arcane that I actually played in the video game, and that I do feel has some explanation as to why I feel as attached to her as a character, more so than almost any other character. But from a narrative perspective, you don't need to play the game, mostly because the game doesn't contain the narrative. You ask, hey, what do you do in League of Legends? And you're like, well, you go to this place called Summoner's Rift, and you go down these lanes, and you're taking down towers and minions and other champions, and none of that happens in Arcane. None of that matters to Arcane. The lore of Arcane is told through pretty much everything except the game. We're gonna get to a point probably with League of Legends where the game is almost gonna feel like a spin-off to the actual lore of this world. From an actual narrative, from a narrative canon perspective, let's say, Arcane is entirely non-canon. Well, some of the character relationships have existed in what seems to be main LoL canon. So like Vi and Caitlyn do actually know each other and have worked together, and hell, there's an entire animated short thingy where they're fighting a whole bunch of other champions and things, and it's really cool and badass, especially if you rewatch it after Arcane, because you're like, cool. But then like the League of Legends lore goes off and does this whole other things. Are you really disappointed in how miserable Jinx's life is at the end of it? Hey, go watch the animated short where she's part of the Guardians of the Galaxy, basically. There's an alternate universe in lore where Jinx actually has a happy ending and a family, and it works out great over there. But everything is just like so expanded and blown out of proportion everywhere that Arcane basically is self-contained. Now, some people I've seen try to argue that Arcane should be the new canon of League of Legends, and maybe there's arguments to be made there, especially if it ends up being the staple, the thing that everybody knows from League of Legends over the game itself, then yeah, maybe that is something worthwhile. But when you're trying to decide whether or not to watch Arcane, then just watch Arcane. It's gotten to that level of popularity that, like, it might be canon now. It might be the definitive canon, and everything else is uncanon now, which potentially is one of the downsides to it doing very well. There are other downsides. So I feel like a downside to any animation doing well at Netflix is that they might suddenly think, hey, the kids these days, they really like this animation stuff. I don't really get it. Oh, what's this? You're pitching us an animated show thing? Ah, kids love that. Greenlight it and make us some money. Which just makes me feel like we're gonna see a lot more animated content. Not good animated content. We're gonna start seeing more quantity over quality. And that's like why we have 40 shows of anime a season and only like 2 or 3 of them are actually any good. Hot take! But no, I actually do think that that's going to be an interesting thing. Success is not always a good thing. And I do worry about the quality of future seasons of Arcane, and just like Arcane as a continuing franchise beyond this point, because I feel like I've been here before, especially where Netflix is concerned. So I'm gonna have another Netflix hot take real quick right here that I don't know if many other people agree with, but we're gonna briefly sidetrack and talk about Stranger Things. Why? Because Stranger Things was a series that was not expected to blow up in the way that it did when the first season was made and released. There was like no marketing for Stranger Things when it first came out, like none whatsoever, and then it exploded. Like, I guess Squid Game is very similar in that way. It was like had zero marketing, and then it came out and blew everybody's mind. Fair enough. But the thing with Stranger Things is that while there are elements of the second and third seasons that were good, personally, a lot of what I liked about season 1 doesn't exist outside of season 1. There were a lot of things about the mystery and the build-up and how these characters interacted with one another that was entirely changed after the first season. Now, as to why that was that way, there are a number of differing factors that may or may not apply to Arcane. There were rumors that Stranger Things was originally going to be an anthology series where every season would be in a new location with a new cast of characters doing new, weird, mysterious, stranger things. And that could have been really, really cool. But then the show got super popular. Everybody got attached to the characters so much that it almost was one of those, hey, if you don't continue these stories, the stories of these characters, no one's going to give a shit and the show's going to tank. Couple that with the fact that, and this definitely isn't a problem with Arcane, the fact that all of your major characters, well, a lot of them were children, and they're growing up, which means that you need to film those new seasons ASAP before they get too old to play them, or at least too old so that it doesn't look right anymore, which then means that you don't have as much time to write it as you might have had for the first season to make everything as clean and polished as it was. And personally, I feel like that's why season 1 of Stranger Things is the best. But if we apply that to Arcane, what I'm now worried about is that I almost wish that it would do what Stranger Things should have done, or could have done, in that make it an anthology series. I actually want season 2 of Arcane to come out and be like, yeah, hey, you know all of this time we spent in Piltover? We're gonna walk away from that for a couple of seasons. We'll come back to it, obviously, because there's a lot of remaining questions, and developing stories that we can continue and build on. But the world of the original lore of League of Legends has so many different parts of the world to it. So many different champions. I don't know how many champions are in League of Legends right now. A ridiculous amount. And like, Arcane only covers, what, maybe a dozen if we're being generous? There are so many more places and stories you can tell within that actual world, within that universe, and it doesn't need to be focused around Piltover. But they're probably not going to do that. I wish they would, because what I would want them to do is I'd want them to go and tell like another, one more season over here with these characters, another season over here with these characters, and then slowly build up an overarching story to the entire universe. And then, like, by the time you hit season 4, season 5, that's when you have major crossovers, or you start going back and seeing where other stories can be built in and connect with one another. But they're probably not going to do that. Why? Because Arcane was stupid successful, and everybody loves these characters already. We're invested in these characters. We're invested in this world, this city, and people are going to be really pissed off and depressed if season 2 comes out and we don't find out what the hell happened. And I feel like its success has the potential to kill it. And that's really depressing when you think about it. Now, I could be wrong. Like, it is not necessarily Stranger Things, because they could do a lot with it as far as where they could continue to go. But I do feel like Arcane is so self-contained as a story that trying to force yourself into the box of continually using this city and these characters, you're going to run out eventually. And if you're going to take that and move on to other casts of characters, the best time to do it is now, so that you can get people kind of prepped for that as you go. Because otherwise what you're going to end up doing is you're going to develop who the main characters of Arcane are, and then attempt to justify why they are in all of the other corners of the world. Or you're just not going to adapt any of those corners of the world, and you're going to leave whole swaths of amazing and interesting characters out in the cold. Sometimes literally. Because the characters are literally the best part of this show. Like, bar none. How they interact with one another. The banter that they have. Like, I talked about banter when I was bitching about Bebop. I was talking about banter as how it was almost a negative thing. Because it felt like forced banter. None of the banter in Arcane feels forced. Like, none of it. Even some things that you look up later and you realize, oh, that was a canonical thing, like Vi calling Caitlyn Cupcake. That's a canon thing. That's a thing that existed before Arcane. And so it's one of those, hey, you had to force that in here somewhere. But it felt natural. Just like in the way that it was presented and paced and delivered, it was perfect. And it just worked. It didn't feel forced. There's very little about this show that felt forced. I think the only time that anything felt forced, and I feel like I started saying that like 10 minutes ago, and now I'm coming back to it. I feel like the only time that anything felt forced was at the very end of the prologue. I think it was part 1, because I watched it all in one go, in fairness. I know it was split up into 3 parts for people. But it was at the very end, right before the time skip, where Vi left Powder alone at the docks because of what Powder did. And it's one of those, if anything was to feel forced in the entire show, and I don't necessarily feel like it was, but if I had to point to something, that would probably be it. It's like, this is the one moment where this had to happen in order for the rest of the show to continue like it did. Because if this one moment didn't happen, if Vi stayed with Powder the entire time, if she never left Powder and then got kidnapped and tossed in jail, then the entire rest of the story would have been vastly different. So I feel like that was the only moment of something that had to happen and kind of felt a little bit weird. Like, we understand that Vi was very, very, very pissed off at Powder. Was not necessarily in the right mind space because of what she immediately just went through. And it is possible that I'm looking at it the wrong way and thinking that someone wouldn't have differing priorities, because I feel like with how family-oriented Vi had been up till that point, that the idea of her abandoning Powder in the middle of this dock with who knows what the hell's going on around them in the chaos that just occurred just seemed very weird to me. But that's me. That's like the only thing I can point to in the entire show. Everything else, literally everything else, I don't think I had a single problem with. Arcane was, and is, a supremely amazing animated series. Whether or not it actually changes, like, the animation landscape, I have no clue. I don't know if it's going to be like a new Spider-Verse or something, because Spider-Verse has changed so many things, and I feel like for some people, Arcane is going to do a very similar thing. Maybe not to the same level, because I don't know if it'll reach the same levels of popularity. Animation has this problem where, regardless of how popular it is with people who have seen it, or how well critics have talked well about it, there are huge swaths of the general population who would not watch Arcane purely because it is animated. If Arcane was made in live action, a lot more people would have chosen to actually watch it, which is a shame because the animation is like half the reason why the show is as good as it is. There are so many things that are good about the show because it's in animation, and so many things that could only be as good as it was because it was animated. I'll leave you with one last thing, because I've been diving into this far too often and it's relevant to what I was just saying. There was a quote by one of the chief animation directors on Arcane who talked about how for their animation they chose not to use mocap. A lot of times now, either because it's cheaper or easier or for a variety of reasons, when you have 3D animation, mocap is usually the way to go, where you have actual actors in the green screen suits with the little balls on it so that you can capture their motion and try to be as realistic with their motion as possible, because why wouldn't it be realistic? It's actual people. Arcane didn't do that. They keyframed the animation of all of their characters, which I feel like was a lot more work, but because of that, I also feel like it turned out so much better because there was so much more control over the actual performances of the characters. Like the vocal performances, also stellar and absolutely brilliant, but the actual visual performances of these characters could really only have been done in keyframe, which is why they did it that way. And it does annoy me that, like, if you're wanting to put things on pedestals of quality, I would say that Arcane is at least as good in quality as Squid Game, but Squid Game has taken off so much more in people's minds and in what people watch because it is live action. People just think that that is something more for them. You look at animation and people think, no, that's just kid stuffs now, or that's just Disney or Pixar stuff, which is why the Disney and Pixar section like dominates the Oscars every year, constantly, always. So hopefully Arcane, not at the Oscars, because the Oscars don't give a shit about television, but hopefully Arcane will actually get some reasonable amount of awards this year, because it absolutely deserves it. Not the Anime Awards, obviously, because it didn't come from the Champagne region of France. Also because I don't think it was actually out by the time that judges were doing Anime Awards things for this year. But chances are it would not have been allowed, because by previous rules that I have seen in the Anime Awards, things like Arcane would not have been allowed because it wasn't made in Japan. Ha 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 ha. But at the end of the day, if you haven't watched it and you've been like watching me talk about it and spoil some parts of Arcane, largely I didn't spoil Jack. But, you know, I talked about some things that, because everything is a spoiler, I've talked about some spoilerific things. If you haven't watched Arcane, go watch Arcane. If you have watched Arcane, right? That's how I can describe it. It's just so good. You just be like, right? I haven't watched something that good in a very long time. And by a very long time, I mean probably about a year. The last time I felt like this hype for something was when I watched the Made in Abyss movie. And I am anxious about what is going to come out of this. We're not going to be seeing anything more Arcane. I'm pretty sure that nothing more Arcane is coming out in 2022. And to be fair, that's a very quick turnaround, because I think season 1 of Arcane took them 6 years to do. Now, obviously, they don't have to do 6 years anymore because they have a lot of things already kind of set in stone, and they can just continue on from what they've already built. But still, if I'm hoping for any semblance of quality, I almost hope that we don't see anything until like mid to late 2023 for the next season of Arcane. But, you know, now that it's made some money, who knows? And who knows whether or not that's going to affect quality in the future. I hope not, but we'll have to see. So, thank you for watching this video. Thank you, my patrons, whose names have been scrolling here, for allowing me to continue to do what I do. I love and appreciate you all. And very special thanks to a particular set of patrons who I love to shout out at the end of the video. And you are Wago221, Hector Montemea, Ryfen Bonaparte, Omar Showman, and Siri Yamako for being especially awesome. And until next time, watch more animation. Now, watch more anime. Arcane's included. Screw off. And stay frosty.